For many centuries, London was a dangerous place. It was a magnet for the very worst kind of people. Jack the Ripper dominated the headlines, but he wasn't the only killer around. Murder was afoot. The fear of death was everywhere. But police had their work cut out to track the culprits down. In this series, we'll be investigating some of the city's most notorious and intriguing crimes.
The female defendant.
Sexual intrigue, vicious murder, as well as the latest technology, fed the nation's insatiable desire for gruesome stories of London's dark side. John Christie stands as one of the most notorious killers in history. The case of the unassuming little man with a terrifying psyche remains debated to this day. It was a morbid tale that horrified the public, but at the same time spurred enormous press attention. A serial killer managed to wriggle free of the law as an innocent man was sent to the gallows for his crimes. In this two-part documentary, we will delve into the world of post-war Britain, where sensational murder stories dominated the headlines. London was home to a terrifying collection of killers. The acid bath murderer John George Haigh was on the loose at the same time as Christie. But as these killers were tracked down and brought to justice, attitudes towards capital punishment were being changed by the troubling case of Timothy Evans and the public outcry to the executions of Derek Bentley and Ruth Ellis. The times were changing indeed. Rillington Place would become one of the most notorious addresses in London's history. In the early 1940s, it was in one of the most run-down areas of the capital, Notting Hill. One of the tenants residing there at that time was John Christie. Christie was born in 1899 in a village near Halifax, West Yorkshire. He was from a large family and had a troubled relationship with his father. It was in adolescence, though, that Christie's sexual problems would develop. His impotence would haunt him for his entire life and may even be the cause of his violent and murderous behavior. His sexual failures soon became public knowledge.
He would meet girls and they'd have a snog and it would go further. He failed to perform several times.
He was called Can't Do It Christie or No Dick Reggie because as a young man he was unable to perform sexually. And the word got round, and so friends taunted him about his lack of sexual prowess. This was a reputation that clung to him for all of his life.
Perhaps eager to conquer his inadequacy with the First World War raging on the continent, Christie enlisted in the 52nd Nottinghamshire and Derby Regiment of the British Army. He was just 17. In the last months of the war, Christie was posted to France. Shortly after he arrived at the front, however, Christie was caught in a gas attack. Mustard gas was used extensively during the First World War. Although initially deployed by the Germans, by the end of the conflict, both sides were using the vicious chemical weapon against each other.
He'd been exposed to an attack of mustard gas, and for about 3 years or so, he could hardly speak. He lost his voice, and this was a problem which did come back to him from time to time.
Christie has said various things, but we don't really know for sure whether that really affected him. And certainly he was operating at a sort of fairly sensible level in various employments he had, so it wasn't anything that would bring him into the category of being anything other than completely responsible for his criminal actions.
Following the end of World War I, Christie married Ethel Simpson in Halifax, but their early years together had been unhappy. Christie moved to London alone in 1924, but almost a decade later, the couple reconciled, and in 1937, they moved into a flat in Notting Hill.
It's a very fashionable part of London now, but then Notting Hill was very seedy and run down.
The house itself, one day to be so infamous, was similarly dilapidated. Christie's prospects were not looking good either, as he had an extensive criminal record at this point. He had served time in prison for theft and violent assault. But when World War II came along in 1939, a new opportunity opened up for him.
During the Second World War, he was a War Reserve constable. So he was given a uniform. He patrolled the streets, calling out people's attention if the light was showing, warning them blackout, and that was his role.
He was somebody who needed to feel a sense of power, so he was very proud of his uniform. He would make sure it was absolutely immaculate. At that time, a special constable during the war in London had a kind of elevated status because people in the community looked to them for help, but he really used that to his advantage.
For perhaps the first time in his life, Christie was in a position of power. It transformed him, and he embarked on an affair with a co-worker. When the woman's husband discovered the illicit romance, he gave Christie a violent beating. Soon after, Christie carried out his first killing.
Ruth Fuest was from Austria, and she'd been a nurse, but she was working in London as a part-time munitions worker.
Ruth Fuest had fled to England after Hitler annexed her homeland in 1938. She was reported missing by her landlady, but in truth her absence was not otherwise much noticed. She was, after all, an unmarried foreigner who had lived at over a dozen addresses in just 4 years. She had no family in London and few friends. Given the war, it is perhaps not surprising that her disappearance was not investigated further. By 1944, Christie was already targeting his next victim. At this time, he was working as a clerk in a radio factory. It was here that he would first meet a new colleague, Muriel Edie. Knowing she was a hypochondriac, Christie preyed on her fears and wormed his way into her confidence. He convinced her that he had the medical knowledge to cure her chest problems.
Hello, love.
Hello, Mr. Christie. Oh, it's horrible outside. It goes right through you.
Yes, I've hardly been out all week.
You're feeling better now, though?
Oh, much. Much.
Because we missed you at work.
We can have a nice cup of tea afterwards. And you can tell me all the gossip I've missed. Come on through.
Mrs. Christie not home?
No, Ethel is out. Shopping. Why don't you take a seat there? That's right.
Is this it then?
No, don't.
Sorry.
It's quite all right. It's just a little sensitive, you understand? Now, this will be just the thing for your catarrh. Cleared my bronchitis right up.
It's very kind of you. I get so bad in this weather. I'm coughing all day and night.
Yes, the damp. Not good for the chest. Constricts the bronchial passages, you understand?
You have a word for everything, don't you, Mr. Christie?
That's what my medicine does. Unblocks those passages.
smells a bit like Friar's balsam.
Are you prying into my secret recipe, Muriel?
Oh, no, no.
Well, it does share some common ingredients, but Friar's balsam doesn't have the really good stuff that's in mine. Now, are you ready? Just sit yourself back. Close your eyes now, Muriel. Just relax, that's right. Breathe, nice and deeply. You'll soon be able to feel it. That's it, just breathe. Breathe. Lovely.
It's nice, this.
Now, you might start feeling just a touch dizzy, but that's all right. You sat down with me. It's just a sign the medicine's beginning to work.
Christie.
Shh. Keep breathing. That's it. It's working. Breathe. Breathe.
As World War II was coming to a close, the murderous reign of John Christie was just beginning. He would manage to avoid capture for almost a decade, but when new tenants came to stay at 10 Rillington Place, his true nature was in danger of being revealed. John Christie had devised a sinister technique that would enable him to kill without confrontation or violence. That night, he moved the body temporarily into the washhouse at the back of 10 Rillington Place, before finally burying Muriel fully clothed in the garden beside his earlier victim. Unlike Ruth First, though, Muriel was missed. However, amid the flurry of V1 and V2 bombings that year, it was sadly assumed by friends and family that Muriel had been killed in such an attack. There was little investigation. Christie had escaped any suspicion yet again. The end of the war in 1945 should have brought some much-needed respite for the citizens of London, but the truth was, several other serial killers were on the loose, including the acid bath murderer, and a string of horrifying deaths were about to take place. In 1946, the chalk pit murder and the mysterious figure of Thomas Lee grabbed the country's attention. Lee had been a successful politician in Australia whose political opponents had a worrying habit of disappearing or apparently jumping off cliffs. Whilst in the UK, he and an accomplice had been convicted in court of kidnapping, torturing and killing a man and leaving his body in a chalk pit in Surrey. Lee was later declared insane and sent to Broadmoor. At the same time, the gruesome crimes of the lady killer Neville Heath also captured the British public's attention, but John Christie managed to remain undetected. In March 1948, new neighbours moved into 10 Rillington Place, a young couple named Timothy and Beryl Evans, who soon welcomed a baby called Geraldine. They would set in motion a chain of events that would threaten to expose Christie's crimes to the world and send an innocent man to the gallows.
Timothy Evans was born on the 20th of November 1924 in Merthyr Vale in Wales. He had learning difficulties and was prone to tantrums. He often lied about his own life story in order to boost his confidence. That would prove an unfortunate trait when he was eventually accused of murder.
Timothy Evans was, in the terms of that time, simple-minded. He'd had learning problems from a young age, He was working as a van driver in London at the time, and he met Christie and his wife Ethel when him and his wife Beryl went to 10 Rillington Place, Christie's house, because they were looking for somewhere to live. And they went to view a room on the second floor.
The Evans marriage was a strained one. There were constant issues with debt, and it didn't help that both Beryl and Timothy were quite bad with money.
Beryl became pregnant for the second time in the autumn of 1949, but their strained financial situation and their volatile relationship meant that the couple were considering an abortion. However, the procedure in those days was far from straightforward. This was a decision that wouldn't be taken lightly.
In working class districts like this, if pills couldn't be obtained, standard method of abortion would have been a hot bath, a bottle of gin and a knitting needle. Gin was known as mother's ruin for that reason.
Women in that situation were at the mercy of backstreet doctors who were not always trained. And Christie's a prime example. I mean, he knew nothing about how to perform an abortion at all. He basically gassed her, like he did with some of his other victims, to put her to sleep.
Timothy Evans was strongly opposed to the idea from the start, but was persuaded by Beryl and eventually agreed to the procedure. They didn't have to look far to find someone who claimed he could carry out the operation. Initially, it seemed fortuitous that their quiet, unassuming neighbor, claiming to have a medical background, was more than happy to help. But for John Christie, this was an opportunity. Whilst Timothy Evans was at work, Christie prepared his formula, and like with Muriel Edie before her, he used coal gas to render Beryl unconscious.
Tim, Mr. Christie, how did it all go? Sounds quiet enough.
I think it might be best if we spoke upstairs.
What is it?
Why don't you go on up? I'll come behind.
Right. Beryl?
Her stomach. It was septic poison, do you understand? Nothing could be done.
How long? When?
At about 3 o'clock. Another day, and she'd have to have gone to hospital.
What did you do?
What you asked me to?
I didn't ask for this.
You asked for my help, Tim. I did say there was a risk. She was septic poisoned.
What does that mean? I have to call a doctor. Someone. I don't know.
That's could get me into all sorts of trouble, Tim. Just for trying to help.
Well, I can't just leave it lying there.
It could look black for you.
What?
Well, you and Beryl have been quarrelling a lot recently, and in the street. People will have seen, you understand? Tim, they will think that you disposed of her.
But I never wanted this. I told her, I said, I never wanted this. What am I going to do?
You need to remain calm, Tim.
But I said, and now I have to feed the baby.
Breathe.
What am I going to do, Mr. Christie?
Breathe. Nice and deeply. Now, tomorrow, you just get up and go to work as normal.
What about Geraldine?
I'll see about someone to take care of the baby. Don't you worry about her. You go to work.
I go to work
as normal. Now, we're going to have to move Beryl. I've opened up Mr. Kitchener's flat. We can lay her down there for now. I know just what to do. I was a police officer during the war, and I know about these things, you understand? You need to be strong, Tim, for Beryl's sake and for the baby.
Yes.
Now, let's sort out something for Geraldine to eat, and we can have a cup of tea, yes?
Right. Right.
The murder of Beryl was just the beginning of the tragic tale of Timothy Evans. By exploiting Evans' weaknesses and inflating his own life history, Christie would meticulously take away everything Evans held dear, the outcome of which would see a miscarriage of justice which would have a deep historic impact. Timothy and Beryl Evans, along with their daughter Geraldine, had moved into a flat at 10 Rillington Place. But after becoming pregnant again, Beryl sought an abortion, something their neighbour, John Christie, was all too happy to carry out. Christie had no knowledge of such a procedure and instead gassed Beryl, physically abused her, and then killed her. Her lifeless body was discovered by Timothy Evans on his return from work. Little is known about the events which unfolded in that house during the days following Beryl's death. But Christie immediately began exploiting Evans' low intelligence. He manipulated him, preyed on his emotions of guilt, panic, and anger, and filled his mind with alternate versions of events. Amongst this confusion, Evans fled back home to Wales, alone.
Christie managed to persuade Timothy Evans that he would be better off moving out and carrying on his life on his own and putting his married life and his daughter behind him in his memory.
He goes to Wales to family, and he gives various excuses as to why Beryl is not with him.
Timothy Evans continued lying about his life. He told some people that his wife and daughter had gone to Bristol, and to some others he said they'd gone to Brighton. On the 21st of November, Timothy Evans returned to London. He claimed it was to inquire after the welfare of his baby daughter, whom he'd left in the care of John Christie. Having received assurances of her welfare, he returned home to Wales. But stricken with guilt, on November the 30th, he went to the police station in Merthyr Tydfil and confessed that he had disposed of his wife. Evans was arrested on suspicion of murder.
He went to the police and told them that his wife had been put down a drain. The police went to the address and they searched the drains and couldn't find anything.
However, a later search led the police to a truly grim discovery. The bodies of Beryl Evans and baby Geraldine Evans were found hidden in the washhouse at the rear of the building. The other two bodies, buried in the garden, remained undiscovered. Beryl Evans and Geraldine had both been strangled. Indeed, the tie used to extinguish little Geraldine's life was still wrapped around her neck. Evans was transported to Notting Hill Police Station. His first moments there were defining ones. Still reeling from the traumatizing confirmation of his family's deaths, he was questioned at length by detectives. But the statement that emerged was radically different from his earlier accounts. His trial was to begin in just a few weeks.
Is your name Timothy John Evans?
Yes, sir.
How old are you?
25.
Did you strangle your baby daughter Geraldine?
No, sir.
Were you in any way responsible for her death?
No, sir.
When did you first know that she was dead?
When I come to Notting Hill Police Station and Inspector Jennings told me.
Did you strangle your wife?
No, sir.
Were you in any way responsible for her death?
No, sir.
With respect to your daughter, Geraldine, which is the principal matter we are considering today, have you ever harmed her?
No, sir.
Were you fond of her?
Yes, sir.
In his third confession, made at Notting Hill Police Station, Timothy Evans had said he alone was responsible for his wife's death, and that he had returned from work on Tuesday the 8th of November, argued with Beryl, hit her, grabbed a rope, and then strangled her impulsively. But serious questions have been raised about this third confession.
He felt as if he'd lost his old life and he was in a corner, and he felt immense guilt as well for letting his wife have the abortion, which led to her death. Really, he was led by the police. He had a low IQ. He was very impressionable, and they were able to put him in a corner.
On a personal note, I was a policeman at one time, and I can remember reading for the first time Timothy Evans' statement. And as I read it, I could hear my instructor, how you lay out a statement. And I can remember sitting there thinking, time, date, place, name, age, occupation, address. And as I went through the statement, I thought, the policeman's written this. Evans could never have written this. It's a policeman's statement. That's always stuck with me, that memory of reading for the first time Timothy Evans' statement.
Timothy Evans later changed his account yet again and insisted it was Christie who was responsible for the deaths.
Is it true that one evening, when you came home from work, Christie said he wanted to chat with you about your wife taking tablets?
Yes, sir.
And that he, Christie, knew that she was trying to get rid of the baby?
That's right, sir.
Did he say anything else, Christie, to you?
Well, he turned around and told me that if my wife and myself had gone to him in the first place, he could have done the job without any trouble at all, sir.
What did you say to that?
I told him I wasn't interested.
Where were you speaking? Where were you when this conversation took place?
In his front room, sir.
Did he say anything about his ability to do such a thing?
Well, he mentioned it, that he had done jobs with other young women before, sir.
Did he say whether he had been successful or not?
He said he had been successful.
He said he had been successful?
Yes, sir.
Did he show you anything? Did you ask him anything about his medical knowledge?
He has shown me medical books, sir.
He has shown you a medical book?
Yes, sir.
Can you read?
No, sir.
Can you tell my lord and the jury what was in that book that he showed you?
Well, it had diagrams of men and women's bodies, sir.
Did he say anything about himself with regard to his medical knowledge?
Well, he said that he had been training for a doctor before the war, sir, but had to give it up owing to an accident.
Did he say what sort of accident?
No, sir, and I did not ask him.
Did you ask him how he would bring about an abortion?
I did, but he would not tell me. He just said only him and a doctor would know how to do that sort of thing.
Police, however, remained convinced that they had their man. The hot-tempered, heavy-drinking, inveterate liar of a husband seemed a far likelier killer than the meek and bespectacled inhabitant of the downstairs flat.
The key witness for the prosecution was Evans' apparently upstanding fellow tenant, John Christie. It was his first appearance at the Old Bailey in a capital trial, but it wouldn't be his last.
John Reginald Christie. What is your occupation?
Ledger clerk.
Do you live at 10 Rillington Place, North Kensington?
Yes.
You live in a flat on the ground floor, as shown in our plan. Is the first floor occupied when he is there by Mr. Kitchener? And the floor above, was that occupied by Mr. and Mrs. Evans and their baby girl?
Yes.
You knew them, did you, as neighbours?
Yes.
In the early part of November last year...
The backyard, is that common to all three flats?
Yes.
The other tenants of the flats have use of that backyard?
Yes, sir.
How did they get to it, Mr. Christie?
Down the stairs and through part of the hall to the back door.
Through your front door?
No, through the hall. And there's a back door leading into the yard. They pass our kitchen window, and it's the first turning on the left past there.
How would neighbours get to the backyard without coming through your flat?
They were self-contained flats. We occupied 3 rooms. They would come down the stairs from their own flats.
Well, so that the jury can see. They would come down the stairs in the middle of your flat.
Yes, and turn sharp left.
Turn left at the bottom of the stairs?
Yes, and then turn right and into the yard.
Is that back door kept open or unlocked?
Yes, unlocked.
So the tenants of the other 2 flats could get to the backyard if they wanted?
Yes.
John Christie gave evidence against him that he'd heard bumps and scraping as if bodies were being dragged upstairs.
He was extremely important. He pointed the finger at Tim from day one. Because Christie, being a special constable, was seen as a safe pair of hands, trustworthy.
Nobody then knew the truth about Christie. Nobody knew of the 2 women he had already murdered and the victims yet to come. And nobody in court that cold week in January could have predicted the case before them would become one of the most controversial and debated of the 20th century. The trial of Timothy Evans began at the Old Bailey on Wednesday, the 11th of January, 1950. The police were convinced he had murdered his wife Beryl and his daughter Geraldine. Both had been strangled, Beryl with a rope and Geraldine with a striped tie found in place around her neck. Although Evans was tried for the murder of baby Geraldine alone, much of the evidence concerned the death of Beryl. John Christie was the key witness for the prosecution, but he also found himself on the defense. During the trial, he had to explain his own criminal background before the court.
Christie had more than just a dubious past. He'd previously been convicted of theft and beating a woman with a cricket bat. Timothy Evans' defense team hoped to highlight Christie's criminal past and portray him as the real murderer.
You were shown this tie at the police station, is that right?
Yes.
And you were asked if you recognized the tie or something like that? I understand you said no.
No, I did not recognize it.
Did you say anything to the police about the tie to connect it with Evans?
I think I did say that I'd seen Mr. Evans wearing a striped tie, but I could not say whether this was the one or not.
What is the point of telling the police you had seen Evans wearing a striped tie if you could not say if it was that tie or not?
I was asked if I'd noticed what type of tie Mr. Evans used, and I said that I had seen him wearing a red one very frequently, but I had seen him wearing a striped tie. But what the stripe was, I could not recollect.
I see. Did you tell the police that it was not your tie? You're wearing a striped tie now, aren't you?
Yes.
Well, I've got to suggest to you, Mr. Christie, and I do not want there to be any misapprehension about this, that you are responsible for the death of Mrs. Evans and that young baby, or, if that is not so, that you know very much more about those deaths than you have said.
That is a lie.
You are not, are you, a man of good character?
Well, I had some trouble.
On 4 occasions, you have been convicted of offences of dishonesty, have not you?
3?
Then perhaps I had better put them to you. Were you sentenced to 3, 3, and 3 months imprisonment concurrent in 1921 for stealing postal orders? Do you remember that?
Yes, I remember that.
Bound over for false pretences in 1923. Do you remember that? At Halifax.
Yes, I remember that.
9 months hard labour for stealing material and goods at Uxbridge in 1924.
Yes.
And 3 months imprisonment and various fines with an alternative of prison, again at Uxbridge, for stealing a motor car in 1933. Surely, Mr. Christie, you could remember that? 4 offences of dishonesty.
I had an idea it was 3.
Here we have a sort of a soft-spoken, respectable man who's seen war service. He's been a part-time policeman. He served in the First World War. So despite sort of minor offences, he would seem to be a good witness. And so he is accepted.
I think the main reason Christie was believed was his wife, because she did seem like a good woman. She backed up his story 100%, you know? And the fact that Tim and Beryl had argued a lot vocally, other people had heard the arguments, was easy to go that, you know, to make Tim look like the murderer.
Evans' defense team were unable to land a knockout blow against John Christie, though. The prosecution had little difficulty in painting Evans as the liar he clearly was. Even Evans himself seemed at times to become confused between his different confessions, and he could offer no motive for why Christie would kill his wife or child.
Is it true that on 5 different occasions, at different places and with different persons, you have confessed to the murder of your wife and child?
I have confessed it, but it is not true. I was upset.
Is it right that you have confessed it 5 times at different places and with different people?
Yes, it is.
Are you saying that on each of those occasions you were upset?
The biggest part of them, sir.
I beg your pardon?
Well, for the last one I was.
If you were not upset the other times, then why did you confess to willful murder, unless it was true?
I knew my wife was dead, but I did not know my daughter was dead.
What did that got to do with it?
It has a lot to do with it.
Is that a reason for pleading guilty to murder? Because you're upset because your daughter is dead by some other person's hand?
Yes.
Is it?
Yes.
I see. Let us just look at these occasions. It is you who voluntarily go to the police station on the 30th of November after you have read a letter from your mother to your aunt.
That is right.
It was because in the letter your previous lies had been exposed that you decided to go to the police, was it?
It was not because of the lies.
Why then did you suddenly go to the police?
I was worried about my daughter.
Are you saying that seriously to the jury? That you go to the police and confess to murder because you're worried about the whereabouts of your daughter?
The trial only lasted 3 days. The odds had been stacked against Evans from the very start. His habit of providing false testimony proved critical, and the jury produced their verdict in under an hour.
Timothy John Evans, the jury has found you guilty of willful murder. The sentence of the court upon you is that you be taken from this place to a lawful prison and thence to a place of execution, and that you will be hanged by the neck until dead, and your body buried in the precinct of the prison in which you shall be last confined before execution. And may the Lord have mercy upon your soul.
When the guilty verdict was delivered for Timothy Evans, John Christie burst into tears. Was it relief that he was off the hook? Well, for the time being at least.
A devastated Timothy Evans made an appeal on the 20th of February. It was dismissed. There would be no reprieve for the young man.
Timothy Evans was hanged on the 9th of March, 1950. When Christie's crimes came to light, doubt suddenly fell on the verdict. I mean, was it really conceivable that two stranglers lived under the same roof?
What seems more probable by far is that in November 1949, John Christie, already a double murderer, added two more to his gruesome tally. The great tragedy of the case was the fact that Christie's first two victims were not discovered buried in the back garden when the police found the remains of Beryl and Geraldine Evans. The bodies of Ruth First and Muriel Edie lay buried just a few feet away. In fact, a femur bone was later found propping up a fence.
This miscarriage of justice would cause debate for decades and form a major part of the push to end capital punishment. But on the 9th of March 1950, not only had one man been wrongfully executed, the real killer had got away scot-free. His terrible crimes were yet to be discovered, and more were to come.
In Timothy Evans, Christie found an easy scapegoat. Police failings in the prosecution and the fact that the other bodies buried in the garden were somehow undiscovered meant that all suspicions surrounding Christie disappeared. He was now free to find new victims, and the events which followed would shock the nation. The murder of Muriel Edie gave Christie his modus operandi: poisoning, physical and sexual assault, and then strangulation. This sexual violence almost certainly empowered and intoxicated the usually impotent Christie. With the killings of Beryl and Geraldine Evans, 10 Rillington Place was already known as a house of death. But the notoriety of this address would only grow as Christie would find new prey. His next unwitting victim, however, would be very close to home.